The most dangerous thing about money is how normal it feels. Your paycheck arrives, your bank app updates, the numbers still appear where they are supposed to appear. And that is usually the moment people feel safest. History suggests the opposite. Every empire believes its money will endure. Every government believes its promises will survive doubt. And every society, just before the fracture, mistakes familiarity for security. That is how monetary collapse begins. Not with panic at first, but with routine. A coin loses purity. A currency loses discipline. A bank balance becomes a promise that depends on institutions already under strain. By the time the public feels the danger, the structure underneath has often been weakening for years. And when money fails, the loss is never only financial. What disappears is not just purchasing power, but confidence, planning, neutrality, and social trust. Because money does not merely store value, it organizes society. It tells people what things are worth, which contracts can be trusted, which institutions are stable, and which future is still believable. So when money breaks, society does not stay in place. It reorganizes around fear, scarcity, and power. That is the pattern history keeps repeating. And it leads to the question most people ask too late. When money stops working, what actually remains? For centuries, the Byzantine solidus was more than a coin. It was confidence made visible. Merchants across the Mediterranean accepted it with barely a second thought. In ports, in caravans, in tax rooms, in distant markets far from Constantinople, the solidus carried something rare in history: continuity. That kind of trust does not come easily, and once established, it begins to feel permanent. That is always the danger, because a strong currency does not merely move trade, it organizes expectation. It tells merchants what tomorrow's payment will mean. It tells officials what taxes are worth. It tells ordinary people that value can survive the journey from one season to the next. The solidus did that for generations, and that is precisely why its weakening mattered so much. Under pressure from war, court expense, and imperial strain, the coin was gradually reduced in purity. Not all at once, not in a single dramatic break. That is rarely how monetary decline begins. It begins quietly. A little less gold, a little more compromise. A state still speaking in the language of stability, while the substance underneath starts to thin. At first, the coin still looked like itself. That is what made the danger so effective. But trust does not fail only when metal changes. It fails when people begin to suspect that power is protecting appearances more than value. And once that suspicion enters circulation, the damage spreads beyond the mint. A weakened coin weakens contracts. It weakens trade. It weakens the state's own credibility. The lesson is older than modern banking and still uncomfortable now. Even the most trusted money in the world can be damaged by the authority that claims to defend it. The Black Death did not only kill people, it changed the price of being alive. When plague moved across Europe in the mid-14th century, it did more than empty streets and burial grounds. It tore through the labor force, broke local trade, and left fields, workshops, and houses without the people who had once made them productive. That kind of loss is hard to imagine from a distance. But what followed was not just grief, it was repricing. When millions die, labor becomes scarce. And when labor becomes scarce, the balance of power begins to move. A peasant who once had little leverage could now demand more. A worker who had been replaceable became harder to replace. Land, by contrast, did not disappear with the dead. It remained. Fields stayed where they were. Homes stood where they had stood, but now there were fewer hands to work them, fewer families to inherit them, fewer buyers competing for them. That changed everything. The plague did not create fairness. It created opportunity for those still able to act. Families with silver, stored goods, or simply the ability to keep working entered a different kind of market. Land that had once been expensive became easier to acquire. Property shifted. Wages rose in places where labor could not be ignored. Social rank, which had once felt fixed, became less stable than it had seemed. This is what monetary and social crises often do. They do not only destroy value, they redistribute leverage. And that is the colder lesson history keeps repeating. In moments of mass breakdown, wealth does not vanish evenly. It moves, not toward the most deserving, toward the most liquid, the most useful, and the most able to survive long enough to buy what others can no longer hold.
Florence looked untouchable. In the 14th century, it stood at the center of European finance, where great banking families helped move money across kingdoms, fund rulers, and turn credit into power. Its institutions felt large, sophisticated, and indispensable. That is exactly why their collapse mattered. The Bardi and the Peruzzi did not look fragile. They looked permanent. Their names carried weight. Their reach stretched across borders. And like so many institutions after them, they seemed too central to fail cleanly. But finance has always had one humiliation waiting beneath its elegance. A bank may look powerful, yet still depend on promises it cannot enforce. When Edward III of England failed to repay enormous debts during his wars with France, the shock did not remain at the top. It moved downward. Banking houses fell, credit tightened, trade slowed. Depositors discovered that prestige was not protection. What had seemed like stability was, in part, concentration dressed up as strength. That is the older history behind a very modern illusion. When large institutions break, they do not fall alone. They pull savings, commerce, and public confidence down with them. And that is why too big to fail has never really meant safe. It has usually meant dangerous to trust for too long. The American Civil War was fought with rifles, railroads, and bodies. But it was also fought with paper. War on that scale demanded more than courage. It demanded financing. And when governments run out of easier choices, they reach for the oldest monetary temptation in political history. They print. In the North, the Union issued greenbacks, paper money backed not by gold, but by the authority and future tax power of the United States. It was a radical step, and in some ways an unavoidable one. But unavoidable does not mean harmless. As more paper entered circulation, prices rose. The currency still functioned, but less cleanly. Each new issue asked the public to keep trusting that tomorrow's dollars would still mean roughly what today's dollars meant. That is always the real test. In the South, the problem became far more brutal. The Confederacy, weaker in industry, weaker in revenue, and under immense military pressure, printed money on a scale it could not defend with productive strength. What it created looked like currency, but war was eating the promise underneath it. And once that process begins, the decline can turn vicious very quickly. Prices did not simply climb, they ran. A soldier could be paid, then discover his pay had already lost meaning before it reached a market stall. A household could save in paper, then watch months of restraint dissolve into almost nothing. What people held in their hands still looked like money. What it could command in the real world changed by the week. That is what war does to paper promises when production, confidence, and state survival all begin to weaken at once. Money stops acting like a store of value. Then it stops acting like a measure. And eventually, it struggles to act even as a medium of exchange. By the final years of the war, Confederate currency was not merely weak. It was socially humiliating. It distorted wages. It punished savers. It rewarded anyone holding food, land, livestock, metal, or goods that could still be bartered outside the fiction of official paper. And that is the colder lesson beneath the battlefield. When a currency begins to die, society reorganizes around what is still real. Not salary, not patriotic rhetoric, not printed reassurance. Real goods, real assets, real leverage. The people who survived best were rarely the ones most loyal to the paper itself. They were the ones holding something war and inflation could not so easily erase.
The French Revolution did not only overthrow a monarchy, it also tried to rebuild trust on paper. The Assignats were issued with a powerful claim behind them. Confiscated land, seized from the church and tied, in theory, to something real. That was the promise. And for a moment, it sounded rational. A new regime, a new financial instrument, a new future, backed not by royal privilege, but by national property. But money does not become trusted simply because power declares a noble purpose for it. It becomes trusted when people believe the promise will be restrained. That is where the revolution failed. The Assignats were printed beyond discipline, beyond caution, and eventually beyond belief. Each new issue was meant to solve pressure in the present. Instead, it weakened confidence in the future. And that is how paper money often dies. Not in one dramatic instant, but through repetition. Another issue, then another, and another.
For the flour?
Soon the notes still circulated, but less honorably. Their official status remained. Their real authority did not. Farmers grew reluctant to exchange food for paper. Merchants wanted something firmer. Households reached for what revolutions cannot print into existence: silver, goods, stored provisions, anything that could still command trust when rhetoric no longer could. That is the deeper humiliation of monetary failure in revolutionary times. Political passion can seize institutions. It can seize land. It can seize language. But it cannot force society to believe forever in money that is being diluted in plain sight. And once that belief begins to crack, the consequences move quickly. Markets tighten. Food gets harder to buy. Daily life becomes more tense, more suspicious, more fragile. Because when a currency loses credibility, the loss is never just financial. It is social. People stop trusting not only the paper, but the order that issued it.
The Asian financial crisis of 1997 did not begin as a street-level disaster. It began in the language of modern confidence. Fixed exchange rates, foreign borrowing, fast growth, a sense common to every optimistic era that the system was more stable than it really was. That was the trap. In countries across Southeast Asia, debt had been built on a dangerous assumption that local currencies would remain steady enough to support obligations denominated in dollars. As long as confidence held, the structure seemed manageable. But when confidence breaks, mathematics turns political very quickly. Once currencies began to fall, the burden of dollar debt did not merely increase, it changed shape. Loans that had looked serviceable became crushing. Balance sheets that had looked healthy became fragile. Companies that earned in local currency suddenly owed in something far harder. And that is one of the oldest brutalities in financial history.
If you borrow in someone else's money, your survival depends on conditions you do not control. What followed was not abstract. Businesses failed, jobs disappeared, household purchasing power collapsed, savings lost weight, property changed hands under pressure, and ordinary people who had not designed the architecture of the crisis were forced to live inside its consequences. That is what modern financial collapse often looks like. Not wheelbarrows of banknotes, not always dramatic scenes of total monetary death, but a slower suffocation. Your wage remains in local currency. Your costs rise. Credit tightens. Assets weaken. And the distance between what you earn and what you owe becomes impossible to cross. Meanwhile, those holding dollars, offshore assets, or wealth beyond the reach of the local collapse were hit differently. Not untouched, but protected in ways the average citizen was not. And that is why this crisis mattered so much. It revealed that in a globalized financial order, collapse does not only punish weakness, it punishes dependence. When the local currency breaks, but the debt remains foreign, society does not absorb the shock evenly. Power moves upward, ownership shifts, and survival becomes easier for those standing closest to hard currency, and hardest for those trapped inside the system that is failing.
By now, the pattern should feel uncomfortably familiar. The form changes, the centuries change, the language changes, but the structure does not. Sometimes a state weakens money by diluting the coin. Sometimes it prints beyond restraint. Sometimes banks look solid until trust leaves them. Sometimes debt is borrowed in a currency the borrower does not control. And sometimes the crisis begins in one place, then spreads through the entire social order because confidence itself has started to fail. That is the deeper pattern beneath monetary collapse. Not one mechanism, a family of mechanisms. Debasement, overissue, institutional fragility, foreign currency dependence, and underneath all of them, the same pressure point, trust under strain. That is why Lebanon matters so much. Because it sounds modern, it looks modern. It belongs to the world of bank accounts, debit cards, salaries, and professional life. And yet the logic of its collapse is as old as any empire we have already seen. People placed money in banks because that is what modern life trains people to do. They worked, saved, planned, deferred consumption, and trusted that the numbers in their accounts still represented claimable value. Then the doors stopped opening in the old way. Deposits were frozen. Withdrawals were restricted. The currency collapsed, and what had looked like prudent middle-class life suddenly became a trap. That is the part modern viewers should not dismiss too quickly. Lebanon was not a story about reckless speculators at the edge of society. It was a story about ordinary savers discovering that the system they had behaved responsibly inside could still turn against them. Doctors, engineers, retirees, small business owners, families who had done what stable societies tell people to do. Work, save, trust the bank, trust the currency, trust the structure. And then watch that structure stop honoring its side of the arrangement. This is what makes monetary collapse so socially violent. It does not only reduce purchasing power, it rearranges status. A middle class can be erased without a war on its streets. A lifetime of discipline can be reduced to trapped digits and a currency losing meaning by the month. And once that happens, society begins to separate more brutally between those who hold claims inside the failing system and those who hold something outside it. That pattern did not begin in Lebanon, and it did not end there. In 2008,
millions of Americans learned that financial sophistication is not the same thing as stability. Homes were foreclosed. Retirement savings were hit. Institutions whose failures threatened the whole system were rescued, while ordinary households absorbed the human cost. In 2020, crisis triggered a different kind of distortion. Money was created at enormous scale to prevent collapse, but the effects did not land evenly. Asset prices recovered faster than the lives of many wage earners. The system survived, but not neutrally.
Then in 2023, regional bank failures in the United States reminded everyone how quickly confidence can move once depositors begin to doubt that access to money is as secure as it looked the week before. That is the truth modern societies prefer to keep abstract. Collapse does not always arrive as theatrical hyperinflation. It does not always announce itself with wheelbarrows of notes or spectacular state failure. Sometimes it arrives through frozen access. Sometimes through asset inflation that leaves ordinary income behind. Sometimes through banking stress that reveals how much of daily life rests on confidence behaving normally for one more day. And that is why these histories still matter. Because once trust begins to break, the damage does not stay inside finance. It moves outward, into households, into class, into ownership, into the question of who can wait, who must sell, and who is left trapped inside promises that no longer function the way they were supposed to. That is the pattern. And it is not ancient. It is still close enough to touch. History does not give us one permanent answer. It gives us a pattern. What survives a monetary collapse depends on the form of the collapse, the structure of the society, and the assets people can still trust when official promises begin to fail. But across centuries, one principle returns with uncomfortable consistency. What survives best is usually what the system cannot easily manufacture. Real assets, real liquidity, real goods, hard currency, productive property. Anything outside the reach of political improvisation and monetary dilution. That does not mean every crisis rewards the same object. In one age, it may be gold. In another, land. In another, food, fuel, tools, or foreign currency. The details change. The logic does not. When confidence breaks, people move away from claims and toward control. Away from abstraction and toward possession. Away from promises and toward things that still hold value even when institutions do not. That is why collapse is never only destruction. It is also transfer. For most people, it is a tragedy. Savings weaken, wages fall behind, plans become smaller, choices become narrower. But for those with preparation, liquidity, or assets that do not depend entirely on the failing system, collapse can become a moment of acquisition. That is the harder truth history forces us to face. Under pressure, people sell what they would rather keep. Property changes hands. Businesses are bought at distress prices. Land, housing, inventory, and leverage move toward those who are still able to wait, still able to pay, still able to act. This is not a moral reward. It is a structural one. Crisis does not ask who deserves to win. It reveals who is positioned to survive. And that is why the question is not simply what money fails. The deeper question is, what remains valuable when money can no longer do its job? Because in every collapse, society begins sorting people into two groups: those still holding claims inside the system, and those already holding something the system cannot easily erase. In the end, The survivors of monetary collapse are not only the people who happen to hold gold, land, or hard currency. They are also the people who can still do something useful when the system stops translating effort into stable value. That matters more than it first appears. Because when money begins to fail, life does not stop needing food. It does not stop needing repair. It does not stop needing transport, shelter, tools, medicine, labor, judgment, and trade. The currency may weaken. The price system may distort. The bank may close its doors. But the underlying needs of society do not disappear. They become more visible. And that is one of the deepest lessons history leaves behind. Money is powerful because it organizes cooperation. It tells strangers what to trust, what to exchange, and what to expect from tomorrow. But when that organizing function weakens, society does not become empty. It becomes more direct. People begin looking less at claims and more at capacity. Who can grow food? Who can fix machines? Who can move goods? Who can build, heal, supply, protect, account, and adapt? That is why real resilience is never only financial. It is material. It is practical. It is social. And it is psychological. The people best protected are rarely those who merely believed in the old order the longest. They're the ones who understood in time that monetary order is not nature. It is a human arrangement. Useful, powerful, often necessary, but never permanent. So the final lesson is not panic. It is clarity. What protects people across history is some combination of real assets, real skills, and a sober understanding of how fragile financial stability can become once trust begins to break. Because when money stops doing its job, the world does not stop. It simply asks a harder question. What do you have that still matters when the promises no longer do?